Are you seeing the slide?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's working. So let's jump into this. Bad behavior and supporting it. I got some opening thoughts here. We'll just go into the slideshow. So big picture, I got to push the mute all. There's some people that got some background stuff going on.
Enough to mute ourselves.
I can't find the button to mute everybody.
If you just mute yourself, that would be helpful.
There we go. There we go. Okay, so big picture on this topic is that this session is going to be mostly big picture stuff because it's really hard to focus on individual services, individual situations, because there's so many variables and moving parts. But that said, I want to have some time to get into your personal things that you're dealing with, because I think that brings a lot more value to the session. So as we move ahead, if there are individual things you're dealing with along this topic in your programs and you want to share those in the chat, we will dig into them. I think the first thing, big picture wise, is that mindset matters. 2-year-olds, right? They're labeled the terrible twos. And we have this mindset about 2-year-olds sometimes that they are tough and hard to deal with because they do a lot of stuff mentioned in the description for this section. There's climbing and biting and running and flipping and dumping of toys, and they're loud, and they get this label as terrible. And then we go into interacting with them with this terrible twos mindset. On the other hand, if we change our mindsets to a terrific twos mindset, it changes everything. If we look at those things they're doing, the running and climbing and biting and all these things, as just part of the developmental process, we see them differently. And because of that, we're able to interact with them differently. And so there's great value in paying attention to your mindset when it comes to dealing with all of these quote unquote bad behaviors that we want to embrace a little bit more. Before we get too far into this, I also want to take time to acknowledge what you may be needing from the session. So if there's something specific you want to get out of the session, by all means, pop it in the chat, and we'll grab a hold of it and dig into it as much as possible. And if not, I'll be available afterwards to follow up if you need that, because I want to make sure you're taking away what you need from the session. And so in the description, I talked about running and climbing and throwing and punching and pinching and kicking and biting and yelling, all these high energy kind of things. Since putting that description together, I've added a couple more to the list: spilling and dumping and touching everything and tattling. And all of these things carry a lot of, I guess, emotional energy around them. A quote I love to go to when it comes to these things is from Dan Hodgins. Dan says, "Stop making moral issues out of developmental issues." And this is what we're doing a lot of times when we're making all these behaviors I just listed on those previous slides into bad behaviors. We're turning them into moral issues. And that is, I know, I guess it's just kind of a habit we get into sometimes. But there is a different way to approach those things as a developmental issue instead of as a moral one. I just pasted Dan's website into the chat, and Nicole and I'll have to work this out. If we're going to schedule more of these, Dan needs to be on the short list of people that we bring in to do a session at some point. So keep this in mind. Stop making moral issues out of developmental issues if you want to find ways to be more supportive of all of those quote unquote bad behaviors. Another thing is that children are wired for movement and contact. There's no escape from this truth. Denying that children are wired for movement and physical contact is denying the needs of the children. So as we look at this topic, we really have to look at the fact that most of these things are, in most cases, developmental issues that children need, and also that they are wired for these kind of things. And to deny it is to deny them in and of themselves. Now, while I talk about supporting all of these things, I don't want you to think I'm advocating for utter chaos, which is what this might look like for some people. If the kids get to run and flip and climb and jump and do all of this stuff all of the time, it would be easy to look at a program as nothing more than utter chaos. And that's really not the goal. And there are certain times where we need to step in and kind of shut things down and maybe move in different directions. We're looking at creating a play environment tailored to the developmental needs of the children, not letting them run wild and take over your program and drive everybody crazy. So there's 4 of them that I think we should look at, and there might be more. If you have any others that we should add to the list, by all means, throw them in here. The first one is safety. Obviously, we need to keep children safe in our programs, and so this is a big one. So allowing children to do all these things, whether it's running or climbing or kicking or biting in unsafe way, is of course something we want to and need to shut down and have some control of. The next one is sanity. Let me get the slide's not clicking. Sanity is another one. Your sanity is important here. If there's so much of this stuff going on, there's yelling and running and all of this stuff, and it's driving you crazy because you are tired and you got other stuff going on in your life and whatever it is, of course you might need to shut these kind of activities down for your own sanity. As somebody who's spent 26 years doing direct care and raised 2 children of my own, this is a valid reason to put a stop to these things sometimes. If you feel your head is going to explode, by all means, pull the trigger on some of these things. The next one is situations. There are certain situations where it might be good to put a stop to these things. For example, if the 3-year-old starts climbing on top of Aunt Bessie's casket at her funeral, that might be a good time to put a stop to the climbing. There are situational places where some of these behaviors are not going to be tolerated. Running away from the caregiver or the parent in a crowded public space, when we get to go back into crowded public spaces in the future, if that ever happens again, is something you might want to prevent. So there are situations where it's probably a good idea to pull the plug on some of these behaviors that I'm saying we should support. And the last one of the 4 is consent. If this activity is going on and the person or people doing it are forcing others into the activity who aren't consenting to it, it needs to be shut down, because at that moment it stops being play and it becomes an aggressive or not unwanted act. And so we kind of need to police our environments to prevent that from happening, kind of curtail it in those situations. And I'm thinking about things like biting here is an obvious example. If a child is biting somebody who does not want to be bit, we need to stop the biting. And so those are 4 basic reasons and opportunities, situations where we need to step in and shut these activities down. And the problem here, I think, is often these reasons for shutting things down are used for banning these activities instead of just curtailing them. So we worry about safety and consent and our sanity and the situations that it's going to create. And so we stop all running and we stop all climbing. And we have these blanket rules because of these 4 reasons. And that leads to programs that are truthfully not really meeting the developmental needs of the kids. There's a comment here in the chat. I have a challenge, a 3-year-old child who refuses to be part of the bigger group. She doesn't want to wear a hat. Yeah, I got to wear hats in Australia, or do other conforming things that unfortunately we can't negotiate as they are necessary for health and safety. She doesn't want to join in with any group activities and will hit other children or do other attention-seeking behaviors. Her parents do not see similar behaviors at home. To me, she sounds delightful. And so I guess one thing you could do is get her a plane ticket and send her to Iowa, and she could hang out with me, because I think we both have some of the same contrarian tendencies. Yeah, those are serious things, and they're hard in those in those individual cases to deal with. I think, and we can talk about more of this after the session if you want, but I think the takeaway, hopefully at the end of the session, is maybe you'll walk away with some big pictures, ideas of ways you can focus in on dealing with the specifics this little one is dealing with. And I'm going to have her at the back of my mind as I'm going through the rest of the session, in case any other good ideas pop into my head. 4 reasons for the bad label. So there are reasons a lot of these activities get labeled as bad, and I think it's useful to spend a moment or two taking a look at them. One thing is developmentally inappropriate expectations. We're living in a world where we are expecting young children to do things they aren't developmentally ready to do, that's not developmentally appropriate for them. One of my favorite stories is years ago. I might have told this in the session a couple of weeks ago. Years ago, I was in Minnesota here in the States, about to do a presentation about child-led play. And 2 toddler teachers from different programs sat down at one of the conference tables in the front row, and one started talking to the other about her struggles to get the 2-year-olds in her program to sit still for circle time. And she explained that it was a real battle that she had, and she couldn't see why they couldn't sit still, because circle time was only 45 minutes long. Now, if you've ever met a 2-year-old, you might understand that any 2-year-old sitting still for 45 minutes in a row is going to be a challenge. And for a group of 2-year-olds to sit still for the same 45 minutes time span is almost impossible. But this was the expectation in this woman's classroom, and apparently the others, because she was commiserating with her about how she had the same challenges. And so one of the reasons these things get labeled bad is because we look at them as developmentally inappropriate for a certain age, and then we want to shut them down because this child, because you should be doing different things than this because I said so, is essentially what we're saying. But developmentally, they're not ready for not doing those things. And so we need to look at what our understanding of these activities and behaviors are when it comes to child development. Next one is kind of related, but we're living in a world where there's a lot of pressure to focus on academics. And so instead of focusing on the developmental place where children are, that is probably, for most of the ages most of us work with, infants up and beyond school age, they're going to be doing things that are a lot more body centered because they're at a point where they're learning to master their bodies. And so when there's this push towards formal academics and sit down learning activities, we tend to push some of these big body in motion activities to the background. And so those behaviors become bad because we want children to be doing the sitting still stuff. Although it is, again, like the last slide said, totally developmentally inappropriate. Another one related is age compression, or KGOY. KGOY stands for kids getting older younger. Those are both terms I stumbled across reading Susan Lin a few years ago. She got a great website and an organization called what's it? Oh, geez, it fell out of my head. It's about media and early childhood. So Susan is really into this. And age compression is what it sounds like. We are expecting younger and younger children to do the things that older children used to do. So we're expecting 3-year-olds to act and behave like 5-year-olds, and we're expecting 5-year-olds to act and think and behave like 8-year-olds. The curriculum that I mentioned last, thank you, Nicole. The curriculum those forced academics are getting pushed down and down and down. I talked to kindergarten teachers here in the States, and kindergartners are expected to do the first half of kindergarten now what was the second part of first grade 15 or 20 years ago. And so there's that age compression. We're forcing kids to get older younger. And so we are expecting them to outgrow a lot of these behaviors, the running and the climbing and these kind of things to some extent or another. And the last of these group is just habit. We fall into these things being bad or inappropriate in our programs, giving them those labels, because that's the way it's always been in that program. If the program has never fully embraced toddlers climbing on things or preschoolers rough and tumble playing, we grow into that habit ourselves when we come in. Campaign for a commercial-free childhood. That's Susan Lynn's organization. And our own personal habits. If we were told we need to sit still and be good when we were little and we grew up that way, when we go to work with children, that's the habit we bring with us because that's what the expectation was for us previously. And so those four things, habit, KGOI, age compression, pressure to focus on academics, and developmentally inappropriate behavior are things that kind of lead us towards making these things that we're talking about here bad. And so I want to dig in to feelings and policies around these behaviors, the running and jumping and climbing and biting and all this kind of stuff. I think a lot of adults carry a lot of negative emotion around maybe not all of these things, but definitely some of them. And it may be for very personal reasons, or it may be because that's the way you were trained up. I'm really interested what your experience with this is. Do you know people that are kind of have this negative, it's almost a friction towards some of these activities? And I'd love to hear comments and thoughts if anybody has any or not. Okay, well, think about it for a moment. And if you, oh, go ahead.
It could be cultural as well.
Give me an example.
So, right, say messy play.
Okay.
So it could be that children, you know, mud and dirt and stuff is seen as something that's not to be played in.
Sure.
So because you have that belief, you then instill that in the children, or you don't support the educators who want to bring those, you know, growth the experiences in. So, and that becomes the battle. And I think it also, then it brings you to be able to support what you're doing in an educational and professional way while still respecting their opinion as well.
Yeah. I mean, if you're brought, oh, yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I said if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so if you're brought up and messy play or rough play wasn't allowed, whether it's a big culture capital letters or just your family culture, small letters, if it wasn't part of your upbringing, of course, when people are pushing you towards that or suggesting it or wanting to allow it, there's going to be a little bit of that friction there. So there's all kinds of levels on this, and another part of that is, as we'll get to in a bit, there are all kinds of different people invested in how we do things in our programs that need to buy in. So one of the big things I want to talk about, one of the big picture things, is the fact that we need to get buy-in to supporting these things from different parties. So again, it goes back to things like the terrible twos. We give things that label because that's the way it's always been. Another one is those boys. Oh, those boys. But I've seen the thing. It's the same thing done with girls too. There'll be the queen bee girl that's the leader of the pack and is bossing everybody around and that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of friction about those kind of things. If you're in a classroom and you have one of the 4-year-old girls or you have two of those queen bees that are competing with each other, and you grew up and you weren't one of the queen bees when you were growing up, you might have some friction there. If you have a group of children that are into one of these kind of activities and you never embraced it yourself for whatever reason, it's going to be really challenging for you to open yourself up and allow it to be part of your curriculum. So as we look at these things, we need to ask ourselves: Are we supporting are policy supportive or prohibitive of the kind of environment we want to create? What do you and sometimes it's the written policies that might outright ban some of these things, but sometimes it's the unwritten, the unsaid things in the program that might be the problem here as well. We are, look, we have our operating manuals where everything is written down and neat and tidy, and then we have the way we really do things. And either one of those may be in some way preventing or prohibiting some of this kind of play. So what do your policies say about running and climbing and all of the rest? Are they in line with supporting them, or are they in line with prohibiting them? Or don't they mention them, which is something else that almost that may also need to be addressed. If your policies don't address any of these things, there's probably a need for everybody to be on the same page to revise those policies and bring it up. There's also a top-down push in the comments. There's an expectation that our children will move to school with certain behaviors and skills in place. Yeah, I think that's part of that academic push and the KGOY, the kids getting older, younger. There's that we feel like we need to have them ready for this next thing, so they can't be doing this thing here because we've got to get them onto this thing so they can go on to that thing. And we end up rushing children through their childhoods, and most of these bad behaviors we're talking about are pretty much childhood staples. They're just part of who we are and what we do.
They can just set them up for failure.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I tend to talk a lot. That will just set them up for failure because they're always trying to do the next thing. So if they haven't mastered the thing from before, they're behind the 8 ball anyway.
Absolutely. And what the research seems to indicate is that when we force a child to learn something that they are not ready for, we actually make it harder for them to internalize it and learn it when they're ready for it. So we're actually working against ourselves with this push. And so being able to pull back a little bit and examine our feelings around these things and our policies is probably really a valuable piece. And the fact is, your policies may need updating when it comes to these things, or creating, right? Because sometimes our policies don't jump into these. But if you're looking at supporting these kinds of activities, it's something you need to start supporting during enrollment. And so when you're bringing a family into the program and you explain to them, this is a place where we run and jump and climb and do all of these things because these are developmentally appropriate things, the parents are going to be on board with you from the very beginning, and you're not going to have that headbutting that goes on later on. And so if you're end up looking at changing the way you do things, you may need to start, before you change things in the classroom, you may need to start thinking about changing them with the parents ahead of time, or getting all the staff on the same page, which we'll get into in a bit. Another comment: I lived through all of this with my ADHD child during his school years. All children should be accepted for their own individual styles and needs, and not forced to conform to a certain way when they're not capable of it. Absolutely. And that's the tragedy of this. We often, it would be so much easier to run a program if all the kids were the same. If they were all, day in and day out, they were in the same mood and developmentally the same place, it would be so much easier. But that's not the way humans work. We all have our own individual idiosyncrasies. And not only that, sometimes we embrace them and want to share them with the world, which gives us a little bit of freedom and independence. And it might drive the teacher and mom and dad insane. But absolutely. And so the more we can figure out ways to embrace these things in our program, starting with maybe updating the policies, the better off we are. And so another part of this I want to get into is, are all the stakeholders on the same page when it comes to this kind of play? Because my guess is, if you registered for this session, you are, if you're not already supporting these kinds of play, and here just looking for more ammunition for supporting and explaining to others why you're doing what you're doing, you're here because you're at least a little bit open-minded to it. My experience with trainings is the people who most need to go to certain trainings aren't the ones that show up. So if you're looking at supporting these kinds of activities more wholeheartedly in your programs, your challenge might be to convince your director or your coworkers or the parents or other stakeholders in the value of supporting these quote unquote bad behaviors. And that can be really a challenge. So let's look at a couple of these. How do you feel about all of these activities in your classroom? And it might be worthwhile sitting down and making this list for yourself. What if the parents, this is in the chat, what if the parents think there is no issue with his child and he does not think there is an issue with his behaviors? Maybe there's not one. That's kind of a flippant answer. I don't know. Tell me what the issue is. Because I mean, maybe for that parent, maybe that is a non-issue. But we can come back to that. So how do you feel about these activities? Are you cool with embracing them?
Sorry, again.
No, absolutely. No, I love this.
We've got a 2.5-year-old at our centre. Her parents, this little girl loves water play, loves getting in with puddles and stuff. Her parents have requested a few times that she not go outside, and 2, that she's not playing water. So we did that. The other concern is that, and Stav's going to know who I'm talking about, her grandmother is one of our educators. So, right. So we have butted heads a few times, professionally, obviously, the parents and us. So our doors are always open in our room. It's always indoor outdoor unless it's sleep time. The doors are shut, so the children have the choice to go inside or outside. My argument for this the grandparent that doesn't work with us, the maternal grandparent, we said that children need to be given choice, because if we start saying to them you can't go outside, you're actually inhibiting what they want to do and you're not letting them follow with what they want to do. So this was our big battle. We then came up with some ideas where the little girl could, because they said she's watching all her friends do it and we're having to redirect her, which means we're not actually letting her make her own choices, which is a big passion of mine, letting children make those choices what they want to do. So we compromised, because I think that's something that's always going to win for everyone. We offered her some plastic pants, like paddle pants, to go over her shoes, which then gave her the opportunity to go and play in the water. And as for going inside or outside, we just said, okay, well, when she chooses to go outside, we'll make sure she's got a jacket on, whatever you want her to wear, we'll do that. So that was our big thing. I didn't grow up playing with mud. I'm a bit of a clean freak. And so I struggle a bit with that internally, I think, but then I look at the bigger picture and I look what they're getting out of it. And so that's, yeah, but that battle about trying to, and I think I've gone off track a bit because that's what I tend to do as well. I think it's just that whole being able to support what you're providing on your program professionally, and educationally, like saying the educational benefits of it. So, and without, and maintaining it on a flat line, don't do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what you're doing is talking to the parents and then making adjustments in the environment, how the little girl's dressed to help meet this need of hers, which is to play in the water, is the way to be respectful of them while giving her what she needs developmentally is to get into that water. And so we need to get back to how we feel. We need to embrace and be aware of how we feel, but we also need to be tuned in to what our coworkers are thinking about these kinds of play. Because if you are in a classroom with a co-teacher who does not want the 2 and 3-year-olds climbing, and you're cool with it, you're going to be butting heads with that coworker. And so getting on the same page with your peers, and also not just in your classroom, but in the program. Because if it's okay for the 2-year-olds to climb stuff, and then it becomes not okay when they move into the 3 and 4-year-old room, there's a disconnect in that program. And so one thing I've really been I don't know, preaching, advocating for the last couple of years is that programs really need to have a consistent philosophy that flows through the whole program. And often we end up with disconnects there because not everybody that gets hired has total buy-in with the program's curriculum or philosophy, although they may say the right words during their interview. When it comes to actually doing the job, that conflict shows up, or policies and philosophies change over time, and staff that have been around a long time might give lip service to embracing this new idea, but then aren't actively engaging in it out in the real world. So those are all real things. Another stakeholder is parents. And Nikki just gave an example of this. If parents aren't on the same page about these activities, it's going to make it really more challenging for them to embrace it, for you to embrace it as a program. And so I think that's why it's really important to make this part of your onboarding policy when you're bringing new families into the program, to make sure you're very clear about what kind of behaviors and activities are allowed in the program, so that and knowing why, so that the parents are on the same page as you at the very beginning, and have an opportunity to go to the service down the street if they're not going to be on the same page. Some things coming in the chat here. Let me kind of go back to what we were talking about before, about the child who the parent didn't think there was a thing, have an issue kicking and hitting educators, but the parents think he is just being macho, what they refuse to acknowledge. Maybe he needs to get an assessment. How can we go about to get the stakeholder on the same page? Well, maybe he is just being macho, and maybe he just needs other things to hit and kick as well, which we'll get into in a little bit. And if I haven't completely answered that for you by the time the session is over, we can dig into that more after we officially end if you want to. Another comment is being on the same page as peers can be very challenging and be exhausting. Although I'm fortunate to work with a fantastic team of educators, sometimes adults are less open about their true feelings or philosophy too. Absolutely. They can be more complicated than our relationships with children. Absolutely. Most of a lot of the sessions I do revolve around caregiver burnout, right? And most of that comes in the work environment, comes from peer-to-peer problems than caregiver to child problems. We tend to be very good at dealing with the child stuff, but it's those adult relationships that cause a lot of stress and burnout. My biggest clashing issue, allowing children to explore risky play. Absolutely. And another one is having a child that ignores educators, does his own thing all the time. Yeah, that can be really that can be really challenging, not only with children, but in your home life as well, right?
I've just got this that's been on my mind for ages. So we've got a child that ignores, like he totally ignores you. So for example, if he eats a pencil, and it comes to a safety reason, and we tell him we don't eat pencil for drawing, and we take it away because he won't stop chewing on it, and it feels like he's shoving it down his throat. We give him a teething toy or something, he throws it, he wants that pencil. Now he throws a tantrum. And then it comes to something else like climbing on tables. We've bought a climbing frame from outdoor to indoors, so you can still climb, but just not on the table because it's not safe. You can climb in your climbing frame, and we're talking about 2-year-olds. And when we tell him, can you please hop off? It's not safe. We set up a little tea party so he knows that it's it's not for climbing on, it's for tea party or something. And he hears you, he looks at you, he acknowledges you, and he just totally ignores you. But if you pop him down, like bring him off the table, he'll have a tantrum. I just don't know what to do.
Get a stronger table. Here's the deal. Because one of the problems we have, right, is that we try to create an environment where they can do these things like climbing. Here's the climbing triangle, whatever it is, but they don't want to climb that. They want to climb the stairs, or they want to climb the table. And redirecting them can be challenging, and especially 2-year-olds. They are so, what's the word? Stubborn. I mean, it is amazing. And well, to some extent, we might want to break them of that. That stubbornness and stick-to-itiveness that so many of them have is something I would really like to see more adults have in their lives when it comes to some things too. So you totally, my thing is, I guess you totally don't want to break their spirit, but so I think the ignoring thing, that's just something you have to learn to deal with because you're the adult. And it is something that he will either grow out of or not. I mean, he may end up in an adult relationship with somebody who he can't have a conversation with because when they try to talk to them, he ignores them because that temperamentally is who he is. Hopefully he can outgrow that, and hopefully he will, because in most kids that sounds like it's kind of a stubborn thing that a lot of 2-year-olds go through. But there might not be anything you can directly do about it other than learn to live with it and take a deep breath when it's driving you insane and move on from that, because sometimes that's all we can do, right? But then the other thing is, if you're going to have a 2-year-old room, every piece of furniture in that room should be climbable because they are going to climb it. And now what if you had a table that they could climb on? And I'm talking about this from experience, because in our program, we went, because we wanted to support these things and knew children wanted to climb on stuff, we made sure that all of the stuff was climbable. That meant shelving units were anchored to the walls or the floor so they didn't tip over. That meant the tables were beefy enough that they could support being stood upon. And then it becomes less of an issue and less of a battle. So I know going out and buying a new table might not be in the budget or anything, but that is one thing you could change in the environment that would make it less likely that you had to battle with the children. If that makes any sense. Another one here in the comments is we have an engine room. Works great, like with a real, what engine room? Like a real, I need to know more about that or see a picture. That sounds amazing. The other stakeholder I've got here, I think I got caught up in the chat. The other stakeholder we have there is the they. All of those outsiders who might be looking in on your program. Sometimes it's funders, sometimes it's regulators, sometimes it's the ladies group at the local church who donated books to your book area, want to stop in and check what's going on. There are a lot of them, health departments, all of those people are looking at what you're doing. And to different extents, some of them need to have some buy-in to the way you're doing things in your program as well. And so there might be cases that you need to have them on the same page. If they for example gave you grant money and that gives them a feeling that they, or maybe there's a true reason they need to kind of peek behind the curtain and see what you're doing things. And so sometimes you need to bring all these people together, the parents, you, the coworkers, and the they, and get everybody on the same page about this stuff and deal with all of that friction and emotional energy you might be carrying around the issue. And that can be a real challenge. And I said at the beginning, I'm going to talk about the big picture thing. This is a big picture thing we need to deal with if we're going to embrace these kind of things. What do you got, Nikki?
I think whatever your practices are and whatever people are witnessing, I think as long as you can back it up with a reason why you're doing it. Little tiny examples, not bad behaviour. A few years ago, I was working in a service and I was working with the toddlers, and one of my toddlers, he was 14 months old, got locked in the cot room, all floor to ceiling windows, we could see everything. And he was in there, and our parents said to me, "You're going to go and help him get out?" And I said, no, I can't, I don't want to. She said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, watch what he does." So it took him about, I think he was there 10, 15 minutes, pushing cots out the way. I figured if he got in, he could get out. He wasn't distressed. But again, it's about backing up what you do. And I said to this parent, had I gone in and Marcus, his name was, had I gone in and taken Marcus out, he would have learned diddly squat. So backing yourself with what you do. So in the end, she said, "Okay, I saw what he did. He actually pushed high chairs out the way, he pushed rockers out the way and made his way out." So it's about being able to, and I actually wrote this in one of my learning journal things, about being able to back up what you do.
Yeah.
Let children go up a slide. Okay, others might see that as dangerous, but for me, all that promotes is, one, that they can do it, they're taking a risk, and they're going to communicate with the person at the top of the slide and say, "Hey, I'm about to come up, you don't go down yet." So all those things, as long as you can back it up.
Yeah. And that's why I really think it's important to focus on these big picture issues around this topic first, because that gives you the foundation when it comes to dealing with the realities of what's going on in your individual classroom. If you've got a solid foundation with the developmental side of things and all of this, it makes it those adjustments in the individual room become a little bit easier. I have to leave. I'm needed to get back. Wish I could. Karen, Nikki or Nicole will have the recording, so you'll be able to catch up on anything through the recording. I apologize for me being late. It's my fault. Next on, I want to talk about the developmental benefits of all of these bad behaviors, and we'll dig into this. All the benefits, these things offer all the benefits. All the things that we want children to learn in their early years can be gained through all those bad behaviors I listed in the description, and those couple others I added to that form. And we'll dig into some of those in a little bit more depth in a bit. But let's just look at some of these. All the benefits. One thing is, these activities, a lot of them are big body activities, right? The running and kicking and punching and all of this is an opportunity for young children to burn energy. And some of you may know children, you may have been the children who have lots of energy. And so if you can create opportunities throughout your day for children to use their bodies and burn up all that energy that they have, they're going to be a little bit easier for you to deal with the rest of the day. Most of us have some experience with this. When you take a 2-year-old to the park and they run until they're done running, they are a lot easier to handle, unless they're hungry right away and tired, and then you got a whole nother meltdown on your hands. So it's never perfect, but when you get a chance to burn off a lot of that big energy, and it allows children to settle down and focus a lot more. It's like puppies. I spent time at the dog park today with my hounds because they need to run, and they plop down here next to the desk and fall asleep after that happens. Same with kids. So one of the big advantages is more of this big body stuff, which most of these things are, burns off a lot more energy and makes the kids a lot more pleasant to deal with in other situations. And I think a lot of us have experienced that. There's an emotional release in some of these things. For some children, kicking and biting are often ways that they can deal with big emotions like anger and frustration and embarrassment. And while we might not want them kicking or hitting or biting their peers, we can create an environment where when they're having these big emotions, there are things available for them to kick and hit and bite. And it might take some training to help them learn that they can't bite a person or hit a person when they're angry. There's a punching bag over there, or there is a tote full of things you can bite over here when you're angry to deal with those big emotions. It makes it... the engine room. I was just going to mention the engine room that was mentioned in the chat. Apparently the engine room is full of punching bags and big heavy stuff and all kinds of big body stuff, which sounds great for children who need that emotional release. And how many of you, that emotional release might come from something that happens in the classroom, a disagreement with a peer over a toy, for example. Those things happen all the time. But for some children, they're carrying a lot of emotion into our programs from whatever's going on at home that they need to sometimes deal with before they're able to be fully in the moment in your space. And a lot of this, my experience is a lot of this happens on Monday mornings for a lot of kids. And so you feel like almost you have to train them up again through the week. But sometimes Monday morning for some kids just needs to be a opportunity to vent and deal with all of the emotional goo, is that what we can call it, from their weekends to before they can settle into your program and the way things are run there. And so having a space where they can burn off that energy and have that emotional release is a great learning opportunity. And learning that, yes, I need to kick, and I can go over there and kick that punching bag or kick that pillow, but I can't kick Tim over there because Tim is a person and we have to respect Tim, but the punching bag doesn't care. And so that's a big thing. That's a bit of learning there, a bit of value. Another one is a lot of these things satisfy personal needs, which are it's kind of related to the emotional release, but I think it's a little bit different. For example, running and climbing for some children is an uncontrollable need. That 2-year-old that you're dealing with, Quinn, has that need to climb. And apparently a need to ignore you and drive you crazy, but mostly a need to climb. And so it is very hard to let go of that, right? And so creating these environments where they can meet those personal needs and these things that they might not be allowed to do other places because they're bad is of great value for children. And beyond that, there's all of those learning domains, all those categories that the kids are dealing with. They're learning social emotional development, physical development, language development, and cognitive development in part with most of those things. And most of it, because these are physical things, most of it, it's really easy to see the physical development side of the things. But when it comes to the social bit, and those of you that have taken off, I'll make sure that Nicole gets the link to the evaluation if you want to get the certificate after watching the video too, and I'll get that out ASAP on my end. So the physical stuff is really easy for us to see because these are big active things. But if we look a little bit closer, we also see there's a lot of language and social emotional and cognitive development going on in these behaviors as well. For example, those children that are running and hitting and kicking and flipping and flopping around, if you pay close attention to that activity, there's usually a social component to it. It's a version of dramatic play. There's lots of conversation. There's lots of language use. There's lots of problem solving. Okay, you guys go around that way, and I'm gonna attack the giant from this side because the punching bag you've set up in the classroom has become an evil giant for some reason. And they build this dramatic play story around it, and they're negotiating and using their language skills to figure out how they're going to attack it. And so there's all of these things going on all at the same time. And part of our job, if we want to support these things, is Nikki touched on this, is being able to step back and see the learning that's going on in these activities. Because we may need to keep everybody on the same page, to keep them and the coworkers and the parents on the same page. We may need to help them see what's going on with these different types of play. And so one of our jobs, if we're already on board with these kinds of play, one of our jobs becomes helping others see the value in them. And so it's almost like we become cheerleaders or spokespeople for these kinds of play to bring the other people on board, is what it really ends up being if we're already there and we have to drag some others along with us. And so there's all kinds of learning going on in these activities. We just need to be able to step in and see them a little bit more clearly for ourselves, but also help others see them. And so offering support, we're just going to go through some of these individually and look at ideas. a couple big picture ones again, and we've touched on these, but I just want to make sure we say them clearly, is we need to get adults on the same page. And that's a big one if we want to be able to be supportive of any of these kind of play throughout the whole program. Another one is we need to understand child development, which again we touched on earlier. The more and better, the deeper we understand where children are developmentally at different ages, the better we're going to be able to be supportive of them in the long run. So we know what to expect from different ages. So it's understandable that the 2-year-olds want to climb on things and want to kick and throw things because they're learning to manage their bodies. It's also understandable that 2-year-olds are going to bite because they have these bright new shiny teeth and they want to use them, 2 get frustrated really easy, and 3 like to do experiments. And so teeth are a great way to do experiments. What will happen if I use my teeth to whatever? And so understanding all those different bits of development more deeply allows us to better support these kinds of play. Another one is controlling the environment. The more we can thoughtfully control and manage our physical environments, the less we need to micromanage the children in those environments. And so this is things like making sure if you're in a room full of people that like to climb, that not only you have some climbers available, but that everything in the room is climbable, because that just makes everybody's life easier. If you don't have to say, hey, we don't climb on the tables 1,000 times a day because it's okay to climb on the table, then you've solved a problem. You've reduced a lot of friction, not only for you, but for the children as well. And it's look, different environments, different situations make it impossible to do make a perfectly child-friendly environment all the time. But the more we can do to make that space child-friendly, the better off we're going to be, because then we have to dictate to the children a lot less, if that makes any sense. Next one we've got is permission. Just giving permission for these kinds of behaviors, kinds of activities, if they haven't been allowed before, is the place you need to start. It's okay to fill in the blank, run here, climb here, jump here, kick here, whatever it is. And so verbally giving permission for these kind of things, if it hasn't been something that's existed before, is a valuable bit of this. It's creating a yes environment. And an environment where it's okay to be who you are and where you are developmentally, with some guidelines, right? And I mean, and you really, for most kids, most of the time, you don't need a lot of those things. Like, we don't hurt people here as a guideline for managing a space. Most kids, most of the time, even very young ones, can learn to understand this, so that the child who needs to bite because they're angry knows that there are things over there that they can bite in that bin, but that it's not okay to bite their friends. Now, is that going to be successful every time? Absolutely not, because emotions run high. But over time, in a thoughtful, supportive environment, it gets a little bit easier to do this. So just giving permission for this kind of things is one of the big picture things. And now specific. So how do you support running? Well, you make sure you say, hey, run, but you create an environment where there's open space, and you remove obstacles, and maybe you designate a space for running for the people that need to run, and you make that space available as much as possible. I think a lot of early learning classrooms end up with environments that are very cluttered, and there's not enough room for children to move their bodies the way they would prefer to move their bodies. A lot of early learning environments are designed for the adults who spend time and visit those spaces more than they are for the children. My experience with children is what they would like is a lot of odds and ends, loose parts, and a lot of wide open space. And if we create that kind of environment, as much as possible, we're creating an environment that's a lot more friendly to things like running. And so those are some things. And most of this is pretty basic stuff. Climbing. So what we need to support climbing is things to climb. We do things like making sure that we're an environment with an age that does a lot of climbing. Like I've said twice so far, maybe more. Make sure the things in that room are climbable. If you're dealing with a group of climbers, not so much necessary in the infant room, but absolutely a necessity in the toddler room as much as possible. So, and the thing about climbing is that at that age, 2-year-olds are really challenging with all this stuff because it is a lot more, it's a lot more challenging to get 2-year-olds to climb where you want them than it is 3 and 4-year-olds. 3 and 4-year-olds can grasp that there's a climbing structure over there. 2-year-olds, they want to climb on everything all the time. And so creating that 2-year-old room where the environment is supportive of all these things just gives you a head start in supporting them. And again, makes it less full of friction for you. And so those developmentally challenging climbing structures, because the other thing about climbing is sometimes the things we offer them aren't as challenging as they may want or need. And again, they are designed to meet the needs of what adults think would be cool for kids to climb or will fit in a certain space and may not meet the needs of the individual children. So putting some thought into what you're offering to climb and maybe making as much stuff climbable as possible in the environment are a couple ways to go there. When it comes to throwing, now we can't obviously throw everything all the time everywhere, but we can create an environment where there is a space where throwing is allowed. We might not want them throwing the hard wooden blocks in the block area at their peers, but having a corner of the room or a corner of the outside play space that the kids can access whenever they want to / need to, where there's safe stuff to throw, whether it's balls or stones, whatever it is. And again, this depends on the space you have available and those kind of things, but everything from those bath loofah splingy things to bean bags to actual rocks are things I've seen used. Because if you've got enough outside space and you got a space where you can have kind of a throwing range where you have a target set up and you can have small stones or small balls to throw things, absolutely it's okay to support throwing. And then it becomes a matter of helping redirect that kind of play to that area. Because while we can't always be throwing blocks in the block area, we know we can when we feel that urge to throw, there's a place to go. Although I would advocate for making it okay to do some throwing in the block area as well, because part of creating block structures is the destruction of block structures. And let's be 100% totally honest here. It is fun to throw stuff at big block towers and make them fall down. I mean, it just is. And so creating rules in the environment that allows that in a safe way, so you're not going to end up with a broken human or a broken window, for example, is something that we can do if we embrace the idea that throwing is something that children need to do. And if you want to look at the specifics of the development, I mean, throwing, there's hand-eye coordination and visual tracking and cause and effect relationships and all this kind of experimenting that's going on. Is it different throwing something that's light and fluffy compared to throwing something that's big and heavy? All of these kind of stuff. There's so much learning that goes on with throwing. But in some places, it gets shut down completely. And so think about what you could do in your space to support throwing. Things like punching. The engine room with the punching bags. This is great. You can buy punching bags pretty inexpensively. I mean, real ones, or you can create things of your own. A pillow a rope tied to the end of a pillow and hung from a hook on the ceiling or a branch in a tree that they can punch works great. Another one I've been recommending lately is if you collect a bunch of plastic gallon jugs with handles on them, and then string a loop of rope through those handles and tie 7 or 8 of those together, and then hang that up someplace, it becomes something they can punch and kick and jump at. Or you can leave it free on the ground that they can roll around and wrestle with it. And it makes the plastic jugs, it makes a great noise too. One of the tricks there is you want to glue on the lid, because the containers will hold their shape a little bit better if they don't collapse. And the lid helps that. So things like that. Boxing gloves. Heather Shoemaker's done some sessions in the series of sessions we're doing. She wrote the book Nicole shared a little bit ago, It's Okay to Go Up the Slide. And in the preschool that her mother worked at and she attended as a child, they had boxing gloves. And so when the kids wanted to punch, they got to put on the boxing gloves and do that. Now it was for children that consented. I mean, it's not you put on the boxing glove and just go around clubbing people. You can't have that. But if a group of children are into that, allowing it is a great way to be supportive. So I mean, when it comes to punching and kicking and all of that, pinching, all of those things, when the people that are doing it are consenting, you've won the battle there. Now you need to again pay attention to safety, but that's part of rough and tumble play to some extent. Pinching. Now there's a lot of pinching this is a fine motor skill, and there's this grasping thing, and some kids are drawn to this, and sometimes it's they want the reaction of pinching a person, but for some kids it's I need more small muscle stuff to go on, and so more sensory activities, more small motor activities that involve that pinching motion is valuable, and there's lots of things you can do with sensory play and those kind of things. You got something, Nikki?
Yeah, with the pinching, you can incorporate that with and it's a great skill for getting to use the scissors as well. Just using pegs to hang up stuff like that.
Yeah.
That need to do that.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, and
or
I mean,
pinching Play-Doh, pinching clay, because clay's hard, obviously.
Yeah. Clay is a little bit more of a challenge than the Play-Doh,
Yeah.
but absolutely, those kind of sensory things are great for that. And so if you've got a child who really gets into going up and pinching other human beings, now if the other human being is cool with it, then you don't have a problem. But usually people don't like to be randomly pinched, and so having a place that child can go and get that need for that pinching someplace else is valuable. Kicking is all those things I mentioned. I mean, it's the same, the punching bag, the milk jug thing I mentioned, but then you can add balls, plastic buckets, cans, pillows, there's all kinds of stuff you can safely kick, and just creating an environment where that's okay, a space where that's okay. The engine room that's been mentioned in the chat sounds like a space that's designed for this. Having a space in your program where the children that need to do these things, and many of these things, you don't need a kicking area and a punching area. They could probably be housed together, but being thoughtful at your environment and creating those things. Another one, this is kind of a different one, is biting. Now, biting is often an emotional thing. Sometimes it's an I'm tired thing. Sometimes it's I need a nap and an I need a nap thing. Sometimes it's an I'm angry thing. But sometimes it's I've got these cool teeth and I want to practice with them thing. And so having a tote or cubby full of bite-friendly toys, things that they can bite without breaking their teeth and that can be easily cleaned, is something that you might want in your toddler room or even your preschool room for those children that have that oral fixation, that oral need. Chewing gum I've seen come in handy for some kids that need to chomp down. You may end up that you want to keep it out of their hair, obviously, and those kind of things. And so that might not work in some environments. Things like beef jerky, having that thing to gnaw on. I mean, really, for some kids, those are things that work, and I would much rather have them chewing on a hunk of beef jerky or a chew toy than the child sitting next to them. And so looking for those things. I have a child that bites up to 5 times a day, so any support around that would be great. Rebecca, is that like in a 2-year-old class? What age? Is that like a 2-year-old classroom? I mean, there's so many ways. I just did a session the other night about observations, and on my Playvolution HQ site, I put together some observation forms that might be helpful in tracking down why the biting is occurring, because you can track when it's happening and where it's happening, and you might be able to find out why more specifically and be able to curtail it. But also having some more things in the room that are bite friendly might be helpful. So if you get in touch with me, I'll hook you up with those observation forms that might be helpful. And then the last one I've got on here is the yelling piece. And here's the thing, a lot of times we talk to kids about using their inside voice without ever giving them an opportunity to use their outside voice. And so if we want them to learn to modulate their voice, we need to create environments where they're able to use the full range that voice offers. And again, it's going to drive us insane if they are being as loud as they can inside all the time. but creating spaces where children can be free to be loud is probably a valuable thing, because it does help them learn to regulate their voice, and it makes it, when you have an opportunity to be loud, it makes it easier to be quiet when you need to be quiet. And go ahead.
So you get the educators who will say, "Stop yelling." You think, you're telling me to stop yelling, but you're yelling at me to tell me to stop yelling. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Back when we used to do trainings in person, one of the points I like to make, we would have the sound of those adults sitting waiting for a conference to start, all their chatter before the conference was always louder than what they like to have in their classrooms for most of them. And so being a little bit more flexible when it comes to yelling, and that might be the far end of the outside play space. It might be, you might have a cardboard box they can climb in and yell. You might need to walk around with big ear protectors on while it's going on. But creating some environment where it's okay to use their big voice for those children that need to do it will make it just a little bit easier for them to use their normal speaking voice at other times in the day. I was late and then I ran a little bit long. I apologize. I'm going to paste. I'm going to copy and paste the evaluation link into the chat now if you want that. It's just a short evaluation form, and that'll generate a certificate for you and email it to you in PDF form if you want that. I love talking about this, so if there's specifics that we didn't get to, by all means, reach out and get a hold of me, and we can go into more detail. And I will get the recording to Nikki as soon as possible. Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening, day. Ta-da, that's the end. I never know how to end other than stopping.
Sorry, Jeff.
Yes.
I attended one yesterday discussing behaviours with families with you, and I can't think of the lady's name.
Heather.
Yeah, I couldn't stay to the end because I had to get to a Zoom meeting. So I didn't get any link to get the certificate. So can I get that through you, or how do I get that?
I don't know if the link to that one still exists, but if you email me, we'll sort it out.
Okay, where do I email you?
I will type it in the chat.
Oh, thank you. It was a great PD too, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for your contributions. Anybody else have anything? I apologize again for running late. And Quentin, I hope the 2-year-old, a climbable table will be awesome. It'll solve so many of your problems. I'd build you one if I was not on the other side of the planet.
That's all right. I've got so many ideas now. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Oh, good. Thank you.
We'll put some something soft underneath and they can fall off and not hurt themselves.
There you go. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you. Bye.
Do we get your email? Have I got your email?
I just popped it into the chat.
Why didn't I see it?
Oh.
I don't know. It's like the next to the bottom one right now.
We're still waiting for it. I haven't seen it
no,
as well.
I'm sorry. It went to privately to Nicole. I'm trying again. I really do know how to use Zoom.
I really enjoyed that. That was really, really, really good.
Oh, thank you very much. There, now it should be there.
Yeah, I've just screenshot it because I can't write it down. But thanks a million. That was awesome.
Thank you all. Yeah, thanks.